Welcome to this GASOR webinar on silvopastoral systems. My name is Julian Chera, and along with Pablo Peri, I coordinate the Global Network on Silvopastoral Systems. And with the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock and the Global Network on Silvopastoral Systems, which is an action network of the GASO, Global Network on Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock, we organized this webinar on silvopastoral systems we shared the practices that have been carried out around the world. We know that silvopastoral systems have been developed in many parts of the world, or have been evolved in many parts of the world. So the main objective of this seminar is to share some information about that, what approaches has been had and has had the people in different parts of the world, and to emphasize a bit on what capacity they have for adaptation and resilience. First of all, I would like to introduce Shirley Tarawali. She is the chair of the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock, and she is going to give us some opening remarks before we start with the seminar. So Shirley, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julian. And let me add my words of welcome. Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending where you're joining from. I can see we've got approaching 70 people online, and I believe they were coming from right across every single continent of the world. So for some of you, it's rather early, and for some of you, it's rather late. But thank you very much for joining this webinar, which is on silvopastoral systems, regional approaches and opportunities for adaptation and resilience. As Julian said, I'm Shirley Tarawali. I'm chair of the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock. I'm also Assistant Director General at ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute, and I'm based in Kenya, which is where I'm speaking to you from today. So this webinar is one of a series of opportunities conducted by action networks of the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock. And these action networks are really designed to exemplify the multi-stakeholder partnership nature of the global agenda. We really strive to bring together the diversity of livestock sector stakeholders from right across the world, from big scale to small scale, people who are producing, selling, trading, marketing, and so on. And it really aims to bring these groups together to address different dimensions of how to improve the sustainability of the livestock sector and its contributions to sustainable development. And we frame these around some key topical issues. Now, with the pandemic, every single one of us cannot fail to be aware of the importance of resilience and adaptation for food systems. And that makes the focus of today's webinar especially important and relevant, as it helps to advance those kind of solutions with regard to the integration of trees, livestock, and pastures. And you can see already some great examples of that on the scenes behind Julian, and Eduardo has even disappeared so that you can see the full picture. But these are going to look rather different around the world. And so it's not only good that today we will hear from one of the experts in this topic, from Jose Shibu, and we're really pleased, Professor, to have you join us today, but we're also going to have some examples. How does this look like in different parts of the world? What's the difference that it's really making? And that will hopefully open the space as well for a discussion so that we can grow and learn from one another across our various continents as we explore this topic and explore how to advance it further for the benefit of sustainable development and improving the sustainability of livestock and livestock systems within that. So a big thank you to Julian and the team for organizing this. Very many thanks to each of you, speakers and participants from all over the world. I wish you really fruitful deliberations. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, Shirley, for your words. We will then start with the webinar. And the topic of silvopastoral systems and approaches and opportunities for resilience and adaptation. First of all, we are going to have a key speaker. He's Dr. Silvopastoral. Dr. Silvopastoral is Associate Dean of Research of the College of Agriculture, Food and Natural Resources in the University of Missouri, and he's also the director of the Agricultural Experiment Station in that university. He was the director of the Center for Agroforestry at the University of Missouri for several years, or more than a decade, and is the editor-in-chief of the Agroforestry System, the premier journal in this field of agroforestry, where a lot of the research in silvopastoral systems is also published currently. Dr. Shibu is going to give us this key talk on the role of silvopastoral systems and design of silvopastoral systems and many other interesting aspects that he has been studying during the years. So Dr. Shibu, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for your contribution.
All right. Thank you, Julian, for that lovely introduction. Let me try to share my screen first.
Right. Thank you.
Can you see it?
Yes, it is.
All right. Okay. Well, as Shirley said, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, from wherever you are in the world. I'm so glad that you are joining us, irrespective of the time of the day. Well, I also would like to thank the organizers before I get started, particularly Dr. Julian Chara, for this opportunity to talk to you today. Well, my goal is to give a brief overview. So I will introduce what Silvopasture is all about. I will also talk about how do you manage the different components of the system. And I will conclude by talking about the economic benefits as well as some of the environmental benefits of silvopastoral systems. Well, let me get started. So I often begin my talk about Silvopasture by showing these two pictures that look like Silvopasture, but one of them is not Silvopasture. And I'm sure you know which one is not Silvopasture. The first slide or the first picture is not Silvopasture. Why? Well, we often run it through what we call the 4I test of agroforestry, highlighted here in blue. I hope you can see my cursor moving. Julian, can you see it when I move my cursor?
Yes, this is
okay,
very tiny, but we can see it, yeah.
Okay. Well, so the 4Is, what are the 4Is? This is what we often use in at least temperate agroforestry. Well, it's intentional, integrated, intensive, and interactive. So if you look here, you will see that you are intentionally integrating the components. So for Silvopasture, the trees, pasture, and livestock. And then of course you can expect interactions among the components, and you are managing those interactions intensively so that the system will be sustainable in the long run. And that makes a silvopasture an agroforestry practice or an agroforestry system. Well, we have examples, like Julian said in the beginning, from all around the world. Some of them are centuries old, some of them are millennia old, that are silvopastoral systems. So is it simply an age-old practice with a new name? Well, I would argue that it is not only a practice, but a discipline within agroforestry, with a scientific foundation based on at least 4 decades of scientific work by thousands of individuals all over the world. And today, you are going to hear from several experts and examples from around the world about silvopasture. So it is based on scientific knowledge. And I just did a search in Scopus, the database, searching just silvopasture to see how the discipline has been evolving with scientific data, not just anecdotal stories, but actual data. Well, if you look at the 5-year time frame from early 90s all the way to now, you will see an exponential increase in a number of refereed journal articles related to silvopasture. Well, we started with just 2 during that first 5-year time frame, and look at now, over 125 articles in the last 5 years. And these are just refereed journal article in mainstream journals. And you know there are hundreds of articles out there in the gray literature that are not counted here in the Scopus database. So you can see there is strong scientific foundation. Well, it's a complex system. It's easy to manage the different components. If you are a forester, yes, you know how to take care of trees. Agronomists, we take care of forage. Livestock specialists, we take care of animals. But when you try to put them together within the socio-economic realities of your region, then it becomes a complex system, and we need to manage it as such. And that is the first challenge when it comes to adoption of silvopastoral systems. Sometimes it can be scary because you know how to manage one component or maybe 2 components. Now you are putting 3 of them together, and you are adding another dimension or maybe 2 more dimensions to your practice, and it becomes scary. But you don't need to worry. There is information. There are professionals out there to help so that you can adopt silvopasture. But this management is key. Well, why do we manage the interactions? When you look at the system like this with trees and livestock and crops or pasture, the first obvious thing is competition above ground for all the resources. Sunlight, for example. Can you grow pasture under shade? Well, all these components are competing vigorously for the resources, not only above ground, but also below ground. Below ground for water, for nutrients, chemical interactions. There are all sorts of interactions that we need to keep in mind. Our goal is to minimize negative interactions and maximize the positive interactions to keep the system sustainable in the long run. So let's look into the basics of managing the components. So I will start off by talking about managing trees. And this is essentially tree culture 101. So when you are talking about silvopasture, in most cases, you are talking about going from a pasture to a silvopasture or from a forest to a silvopasture, one of those 2 scenarios. Well, you may also be starting from scratch, growing the trees and pasture together, starting from scratch, establishing a silvopasture. But most scenarios we see, you're going from one of these 2. And you can plant your trees if you are going from pasture in single rows, in double rows, but most of the configurations we see, trees are grown in rows. It's easy to manage this way, but sometimes you see them scattered. And sometimes you see them as scattered. You can establish them in groups. And if you are going from forest, sometimes you end up with one of these two configurations. If you are going from a plantation to silvopasture, you may end up like this, with rows of trees. But the bottom line, when you go from a forest, or if you are establishing with trees, you need to look for at least 50% of light if you are dealing with cool season forages, or up to 70% light if you are talking about warm season forages. You could also plant trees in configurations like this, where it is rotational grazing, and you are using perhaps 25% of your land under trees. So the animals go through in a rotational manner at some portion of the rotation under shade. And this is something that we experimented with and proved that you can derive the same benefits by having a configuration like this. So most of your pasture is still in open pasture, and you are just having a portion, 25% of the land under trees. Well, when you are planting trees on a pasture, of course, you have to control the competing vegetation. Although it is your pasture grass, you have to control it. Why? If you talk to the foresters, they will tell you, otherwise your trees don't have a chance. And here is a simple graph showing if you have competition from grass or forage, in 2 years, your height growth of the trees will be reduced by 72%. Why? Because here is another graph that explains it. With competition from grass, photosynthesis will be reduced by 30 to 50%, which will be translated to reduction in height growth of the trees. So you will fail most likely in getting the trees established on the pasture if you don't control the competing vegetation. Now here is a little bit more information why that is the case. If you look at the soil water near the seedlings, with and without grass, so the green here is without the grass, the red here is with the grass, you can see the soil water is a lot less with the grass. So without the grass, it is a lot moist, a lot more soil water at two different depths. Why is that important? Look at this graph or this table here. The total leaf area of a tree seedling. You look at that, you will see the big difference with competition and without competition, which translates to, again, nitrogen or nutrient uptake. And I have nitrogen data here, a lot more nitrogen uptake without the competition. Eventually, less water, less nitrogen will translate to a decrease in photosynthesis. And this is leaf nitrogen and photosynthesis. So you can see as leaf nitrogen increases, photosynthesis increases. So that means when it decreases, photosynthesis decreases, growth decreases. So you need to compete, or you need to control the competing vegetation. It's that simple. It's not difficult, but it involves management. It involves money. Well, competition from livestock. If you have trees established on a pasture for a silvopasture, you have to protect your seedlings and saplings. What will happen otherwise? Of course, you can expect damage depending on the type of livestock that is introduced. And looking at cattle, I have some example here. If you have stocking rate higher than a particular level, you can expect a lot of damage. And that's what you see here. As the stocking rate increases, so does the damage, browse or scar on the tree seedlings. Ultimately, if you don't control the livestock interaction without a cage or some sort of protection, you will destroy your seedlings. Here is another study looking at 3 months of grazing and what happened with conifer and deciduous seedlings. They were anywhere from 1 to 6 years old, 54% reduction in conifer biomass growth and 22% reduction in deciduous biomass growth. So you need to think about when is the right time to introduce livestock. But if you introduce early, provide protection. Let's say you are thinning a forest. The rule of thumb again is that you are trying to provide plenty of light, up to 50% if you are dealing with cool season forages, and up to 70% if you are dealing with warm season forages. How do you do that? There are simple guidelines to help you, but there are, of course, professional foresters available to help. So you don't need to worry about how do I go about thinning. Seek the help. And of course, here is an example where we reduced the trees per acre from 320 to 70. That decreased the residual basal area from 112 to 45, stocking at 35%. Based on this chart that you are looking at here, well, that resulted in over 50% light level in the understory so that you could have the reasonable pasture growth. So you are managing all 3 components of the system. And here is another example in a warm season area. Well, so when you thin the forest, it is a proven fact you can improve tree growth. No question there. But you thin and put cattle and put grass underneath. What happens then? Can tree growth go down? Well, we looked into that. And look at this control. That means no thinning. And of course, thinning increased tree growth for white oak and black oak. This is also an experiment here in Missouri. And if you introduce grass, of course, you can see a slight reduction, but it is not statistically significant. Thinning and grass and grazing, further reduction, but still not statistically significant. And this is just thinning and grazing alone. So you can see that there is a slight reduction perhaps, but nothing statistically significant in both species. So thinning and introducing cattle can be done. Even if there is a minor reduction, keep in mind, overall, you are trying to optimize productivity, not to maximize the tree growth here either, because you have now 3 different components. And here is proof, if you don't believe the data, you can actually see the tree rings growing so vigorously following thinning and even after introducing cattle. So we went from this sort of a situation to this sort of a situation, converting a stand like this to a Silvopasture. Well, fire is an important tool also. And there are many parts of the world where fire becomes a critical management tool. You can introduce fire, but you need to think about the right time. Like in this example, if it is longleaf pine in the southeast USA, well, you will damage the trees when they are young seedlings. So if you have a lot of regeneration, you need to wait until these seedlings pass what we call the candle stage. So they are not vulnerable anymore. If you are in regions where you grow species like cork oak, well, you need to wait until they are out of danger before you introduce fire. Well, how do you manage the forage? A lot of agronomists are here, I'm sure, listening to me, and you know all about the C3 and C4 photosynthetic pathways. So you need to think about what species to introduce depending on the shade level. Species selection is so critical, the trees as well as the crop or the forage, when you think about Silvopasture. Well, if you are having a C4 plant underneath a lot of shade, based on this graph, you will see that they will be negatively affected. So your goal is not to introduce a C4 species under shade, dense shade. That's why that 70% is critical, 70% light. But if you look into the literature, you will see that modest shade is not bad. Shade is beneficial, partial shade for most forages. So I have combined data here. We published this paper a couple of years ago looking at cool season grasses, warm season grasses, warm season legumes, cool season legumes. Combining all of it, you will still see that at 45% shade, you are still seeing, in fact, a modest increase compared to even 100% light. So this is 45% light. Biomass growth is slightly better than 100% light. You combine that with the crude protein, you will see, if you look at the crude protein yield, a function of these two variables, it is much higher than the 100% light. If it is deep shade, it's not good, but moderate shading is good. So forage species can grow. And your crude protein yield will be reasonable, in some cases better than full sun, if you manage your shade properly in a silvopasture system. Well, you're not waiting for the maximum growth to introduce cattle for grazing. You're looking for that optimum intersection of your forage regrowth and the energy content. So this is about rotational grazing. So if you properly follow rotational grazing in a silvopastoral system, you can even have long-term sustainability. And long-term sustainability of not only the system, well, I mean, not only the tree component, but also the forage component under shade. And I will explain that a little bit here. So if you look at benefits of rotational grazing, we have observed all these benefits. I don't have time to go through each one, but the rest period is important. And that goes back to that intersection of the biomass growth and the energy content. You need to provide the optimum rest period so that your forage can regrow. And it depends. If it is 2 days of grazing, you may have to give 22 days. So there will be regional guidelines for your forage crop. So talk to your livestock specialist or your agronomist so that you can find such guidelines so that you can manage your rotational grazing in your silvopasture. So why is the rotational grazing important? If you overgraze, you will see that you are jeopardizing the sustainability of your forage crop. Here is residual height. You need to leave a decent height of your residual, your crop or your forage. Otherwise, you are affecting the regrowth of the forage. And here is a table that shows that clearly. If you remove up to 50% of the growth, the root growth is not affected so much. But look at it. If you take 60% of the growth, 70, 80, 90, you are exponentially increasing the damage to the root systems of the forage crops, jeopardizing the sustainability of the forage component of your silvopastoral system. If you are also overgrazing, soil compaction will also damage your crop by reducing root growth. So heavy compaction, look at the root growth. Again, it's a schematic, but no compaction and moderate compaction. We are aiming for the moderate compaction when you are dealing with silvopasture. And also keep in mind, we are looking for optimum productivity. And here is what you would expect in a traditional pasture that you see here. And here is what you would expect in a silvopasture if you are dealing with cool season forages. What we have seen is under shade, the forage growth will begin early in the spring, well before the open pasture. So you have early forage availability. You don't need to buy hay. It is available from your Silvopasture. But the growth is not the highest, but that's okay. Look at the growth here in the middle of the summer. It is much higher in Silvopasture under shade than the open pasture. And of course, the silvopastoral forages grow longer into the fall. You can see here. Well, let's say we introduce some warm season forage into the Silvopasture. Now you have much longer forage availability year round from your cool season as well as from your warm season grasses. So you are increasing the sustainability of the system even further. Well, having trees, you have another benefit, what we call hydraulic lift. They take up water, bring the water to the surface, make it available for your forage species. And we have data for that. It's not just anecdotal stories. You look at these two graphs, I don't have a lot of time to explain, but water recharge following rainfall. Look at these green lines here. You can see higher water recharge. And this is the surface soil, and this is 20 centimeters below. You can see that water stays in the soil longer. What does that mean? Higher water. And this is without the tree, and this is with the tree. Higher recharge, that water is going into the lower soil layers, deeper layers, and it's in the soil for longer, making that water available for your forage. Why? Because trees' roots increase soil porosity. As you can see here, just grass, and when you introduce trees, soil porosity is much higher. And this is the CT scan data of soil core. You can see much higher porosity, so you get to see much higher soil water helping your forage. Managing livestock. Of course, proper stocking is the key. I have seen Silvopasture with chicken where there is nothing underneath. They have wiped out everything. Well, if you don't manage it properly, well, it won't be a Silvopasture, like I said earlier. So you have to think about managing all the components, including the animal component, so that you have forage underneath. So proper stocking, doesn't matter what livestock you use, is key. And why provide shade for the animals? Sometimes you see structures like this. Why can't you provide structures like this? Natural shade. Why is it important? Let me just show you one example. The dairy industry in the US loses $2 billion annually because of the heat stress. So when the temperature humidity index is above 72, it's not good for the animals. They lose their productivity. It's not just milk, it's also the same for meat. Well, data show the benefits. Less stress means more dollars. For example, here, I don't have time to read all of this, but you can see studies after studies after studies have proven that providing shading will increase milk production. Providing shading will increase meat production. Providing shading will reduce stress, so the conception rate will be higher. Pregnancy rates and success will be higher. So the animal welfare component, we take care of it by providing shade naturally. Well, it's not just about providing animal welfare. Silvopasture also means more dollars to the practitioner. So it is also economic sustainability. If someone is hesitant to adopt, well, we have data. Studies after studies have shown that it's economically sustainable. It is just one piece of data from one of our studies that shows a cow-calf will make $42.63 per pair more in Silvopasture because of the weight gain. I have the table here, but just look at the data here in red. In today's dollars, that is over $110 more So you make more money. That is the bottom line. And here is an example where a landowner close to where I am from, Columbia, Missouri, converted a forest. So he had some establishment costs. That is true. It takes money to establish Silvopasture, but look at the benefit cost ratio. He made 3 times more than his investment. So you have to invest, but you make a good return on your investment if you practice Silvopasture. Are there environmental benefits for Silvopasture? Yes, there are. And I'm just showing one table, one study. If you compare with regular pasture, Silvopasture can reduce runoff 23% more, reduce sediment loss from your pasture 30% more, 26% more in total phosphorus reduction. So Silvopasture, by planting trees, it can be beneficial environmentally. And here is another example. We administer a lot of antibiotics for animals. Well, you may also know this fact, 30 to 80% of the veterinary antibiotics will pass through the GI tract. It comes through the other end of the animal, and it is deposited through the dung, through the urine, in the soil. And then what happens to it? It can end up in our water, in groundwater, in open water. It can get into your drinking water. It is a major water quality concern. Well, we conducted a study and showed that if you introduce trees, and in this case, we used poplar, Populus deltoides. And here is just one example, sulfamethazine, one of the antibiotics that we use in animals. If you look at the degradation, you see that with poplar, with the tree, the sulfamethazine degradation was much faster. In 5 days, it was gone from the soil, whereas it was in the soil for almost 12 days without the trees. So what's happening here? Well, some of the microbial communities unique to the tree roots were degrading. You can see whenever you have poplar here, poplar, you can see high activity. They were working on the sulfamethazine, degrading it, making it non-toxic. So it's highly beneficial to have trees on a pasture. Well, Silvopasture can also sequester more carbon, offset carbon emission from livestock operations, because we are growing carbon in trees also. It's not as good as forestry, but still, if you look at conventional livestock operations, of course, it's much better because of the tree component and the pasture component together. In conclusion, how do we make it sustainable? How can we convince people that it is a beneficial option, not only environmentally, but also economically? Well, you have to show successful examples. And I'm sure you will hear a few more examples now from other speakers. But manage trees properly. Choose appropriate tree species for the site, for your conditions. Manage stocking. That means the density of the trees so that you have proper light. And continue to manage. If trees grow, cast more shade, go back and thin so that you can manage shade properly. Protect regeneration. You have to take care of your young seedlings and saplings. Otherwise, you don't have sustainability in your Silvopasture. Manage the forage. Choose the right forage. Either cool season, warm season, but choose the right forage for the light level and the site and for your situation. Do not overgraze. Try rotational grazing if you can, and manage livestock, proper stocking, and of course, protect the livestock, reduce the stress by proper cover, so that it's not only animal welfare we are talking about, but you are translating that to more money in your pocket. So proper design and proper management will mean long-term environmental, economic, and social sustainability of the silvopastoral system. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today, and thank you for listening to me. I'll be available, as Julian said, in the end. I think we will have a panel discussion. Thank you. Julian, back to you.
Thank you, Shibu, for this great talk, and for showing all the interactions that could occur in a silvopastoral system and the implication that has for water dynamics, shade effects, grazing effects, stability of production, and all these indicators that have to do with adaptation and resilience of this system. So thank you very much for this presentation. We'll continue now with the study cases. First of all, we are going to have Dr. Matthew Smith on the National Agroforestry Center of the USDA. Dr. Matthew Smith is the research ecologist and team lead of the National Agroforestry Center. And as a research lead, he works with a group of scientists to provide national leadership in agroforestry in the United States. His current research explores the human dimension of agroforestry and how economic, social, and environmental and cultural drivers impact adoption. So thank you for participating with us, Dr. Smith, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. How's everything look? You guys can hear me?
Yes.
Sounds good. So my name is Matt Smith, and I'm the research program lead at the USDA National Agroforestry Center. And today I'll be presenting a very quick presentation on silvopasture in the US. So in the US, silvopasture is typically defined as the deliberate integration of trees and grazing livestock operations on the same land. And systems are intensively managed for forest products, livestock, and forage. And rotational grazing is often considered as a requirement. And I'm going to be getting into this a little later. And many farmers and resource professionals in the US unfortunately confuse silvopasture with unmanaged forest grazing or single trees in a pasture. And this confusion is often to the detriment of silvopasture. And again, I'll get into this a little later. So one of the big questions right now in the US is how many farmers are actually practicing silvopasture? And unfortunately, we don't have a national estimate of that yet. However, in the 2017 Census of Agriculture, we do have two numbers to kind of work with to have an idea. One of them was about 300,000 producers reported using woodland grazing on 10.5 million hectares of land. And so those are potential users of silvopasture. Also, there's a census question asking about how many producers practice agroforestry. And that question, we found out that 30,000 farmers are using agroforestry in the US. However, it didn't break down how many people are using silvopasture. That figure includes riparian forest buffers, windbreaks, alley cropping, and forest farming. So the National Agroforestry Center, one thing we are really wondering is that question, how many people are using silvopasture in the US? What are the benefits of reporting? What are the challenges? What are some of the management requirements? And how are people establishing silvopasture systems? And so over the past year, we've been conducting a comprehensive synthesis of silvopasture adoption. And so we looked at 6 different databases, Web of Science, Scopus, ProQuest, and a few others. And we were pulling survey studies and interviews and things of that nature for silvopasture adoption in the US. And in that process, we found 37 studies from 1983 to 2021. And this manuscript is currently in prep. And the rest of the presentation is actually going to be on initial data from this comprehensive synthesis. So, silvopasture management in the US, as reported by farmers using silvopasture. The most common livestock overwhelmingly were cattle, so for beef and dairy. And some of the other types of livestock used were sheep, goats, chickens, turkeys, pigs, geese, and bison. And of those other livestock, sheep and goats were the most common. One important thing we did find was that 98% of the producers using silvopasture across all the studies were using rotational grazing. And the 2% that were not using rotational grazing, a majority of those indicated that they intend to start using rotational grazing in the future. Another interesting component was an overwhelming majority of the producers with silvopasture. Those silvopastures were just part of the system of their grazing management. They weren't using silvopasture for 100% of grazing, but the silvopastures were strategic paddocks in their grazing plan. And oftentimes they're using their silvopastures for times of high heat, drought, and also in the wintertime for storms and things of that nature. So the silvopastures were acting almost as a buffer against extreme weather and things of that nature. Cool season grass and legumes were the most common forage. Some producers were using warm season grasses, but it was a little less common. And when looking at the treat component, timber was a primary forest product across studies. However, farmers were also reporting using their silvopasture trees for pulp, firewood, fruits and nuts, fence posts, pine straw, fodder, and to a lesser extent, maple syrup. So when we synthesized all the farmer responses from across studies and looked at benefits, overwhelmingly, shade for livestock was the most important benefit. And producers were looking at shade for livestock, not just for an animal well-being perspective, but also to increase production, especially during times of drought or high heat. Another one was income diversification. Across studies, producers were describing the benefit of having short-term income from livestock, but also the long-term income from the treat component. And in many cases, farmers were describing how that annual income allowed them to alter the time of their timber harvest. So if timber markets were weak, because of that annual income coming in, they were able to delay their harvest and wait until timber markets improved. And then some additional benefits that folks were reporting were increased livestock yield, increased timber quality and yield, enhanced forage production, and as described in the last presentation, for cool season grasses, they start to begin growing a little earlier in the season, and they keep growing later into the season. And also during times of summer high heat or drought, the cool season grasses grow a little bit better than open pasture. And so while some farmers were reporting that silvopasture forage production over the course of the year may have been lower than a traditional pasture, the balance of forage over the year allowed them to reduce inputs of forage onto their farm. So basically the silvopasture was balancing farm-wide forage production, which was seen as a really great benefit. And some other benefits reported were labor savings, especially in orchards from less weeding, increased land value, and a number of the silvopasture folks were using it for hunting. And it wasn't just personal hunting, but also they're selling hunting leases in their silvopasture systems to generate extra revenue. Some other interesting benefits were restoration of ecosystems. Longleaf pine was one example, but also oak savanna in California and also Wisconsin and Minnesota. And so farmers were using this to establish a natural and also threatened ecosystem type. Another very interesting one was reduction in fuel loads to reduce the risk of wildfire. And this is something our team at the National Agroforestry Center is pursuing in terms of a research study in the next year. Farmers were also reporting using silvopasture to remove noxious weeds and invasive weeds, and also brush control in hard to reach areas. Now, when we're synthesizing the challenges reported by farmers with silvopasture across studies, we grouped them into external challenges and then also internal challenges. And when we look at the external challenges, lack of information came up in almost every single study as one of the primary issues. Another one was lack of support by natural resource professionals, especially foresters. And like I said in the beginning of the presentation, in the US, there's still confusion among many on what silvopasture is, and confusion with silvopasture and unmanaged woodland grazing. And so across studies, farmers were saying that they went to, say, a forester for assistance on how to establish a silvopasture. And that forester would say, well, why are you putting livestock in the woods? It's going to damage your trees. Another scenario that kept coming up was even if a natural resource professional was highly in favor of silvopasture, they might not have expertise in that integrated system. They may have expertise, say, in forestry or in livestock, but not all three components. And so that was another area that we saw an opportunity for in terms of educating natural resource professionals. Now, when we look at internal challenges to the farm that were reported by farmers with silvopasture, lack of land was one, management expenses was another, but really increased labor was one of the primary challenges that was reported by farmers with silvopasture. Another interesting one that kept coming up was difficulty regenerating trees in established silvopastures. So these farmers were wondering what to do after harvest, especially in pine plantations. Do they establish another plantation? What happens to the shade for the livestock? How long do they keep the livestock out of that plantation, out of that system? And so that kept coming up as well. And now when we look at what farmers were reporting in terms of how they established their silvopastures, the two most common were a forest to silvopasture by thinning trees and seeding forage. The next most common, especially in the southeastern portion of the United States, was converting a plantation to silvopasture by thinning select trees or thinning multiple rows of trees to create these wide alleys in which forage was established. Some other ways people were establishing silvopasture was a wooded pasture edge to silvopasture by thinning, and you can see that in the picture on the left. And then also orchard to silvopasture by integrating livestock, savanna to silvopasture by integrating livestock. And then one of the less common ones was planting trees in a pasture or field and converting that to silvopasture. But one thing we did find is regardless of how a farmer established a silvopasture system, there's an overwhelming preference for having uniform tree spacing. And some of the reasons provided by farmers were ease of equipment use, but one of the primary things was fencing. If trees were uniformly spaced, it was much easier to create paddocks. And so now for the last slide right here. If you remember at the beginning of the presentation, I said we don't have a national estimate in the US of how many people are using silvopasture. Our team at the National Agroforestry Center is hoping to change that. And we're collaborating with the USDA National Agricultural Statistics Service. And we're going to be conducting a nationwide survey of agroforestry producers using data from the 2017 Census of Ag. And so we're going to have these sections by agroforestry practice, silvopasture being one. And we have a comprehensive list of questions for silvopasture, and you can see them below. We're hoping to target 11,000 farmers, and we're going to be asking farmers about when they establish their silvopasture system, their management practices, the stocking rate. Also, what crops and products are they harvesting from their silvopastures and where are they selling them to? Some of the primary benefits and challenges ranked. And we have multiple questions in there about climate change and resilience and whether or not they're viewing their silvopasture systems in that light. Also, we want to know about preferred information sources. Where are they getting information about silvopasture? Also, acreage, tree species used, livestock used, establishment methods, funding. And also, where do they see their silvopasture system in 5 years? Are they going to expand it? Why? Are they going to stop using it and why? Or are they just going to keep the silvopasture system the way it is? And so again, that survey is going to be out January 2022, and we're hoping to have results in next summer. And there's my contact info.
Perfect.
Back to you.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. It was I have to say that I envy the fact that there is an opportunity to measure how many people is practicing silvopasture. That's a situation that happens all around the world. That is a traditional system that was something that has been developed in the years, but there is little information about what's the amount of the areas and farmers practicing on it. So it's very good to have that information. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, now we will continue with still in the Western Hemisphere with Paulo Perry, who is going to talk about silvopastoral design for resilience in Latin America. Pablo is helps me coordinating the global network on silvopastoral systems, and works as a national coordinator of the forestry program at INTA, the National Agricultural Technology Institute in Argentina. Pablo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julian, and good morning, afternoon, and night to every participant all around the world. For me, it's a pleasure to be here and share with you. So I'll try to share the screen. Can you tell me, Julian, if you can see it well?
Yes, yes, it's okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, just to share with you evidence and the information we have about silvopastoral design for residents in Latin America. It's not working. Here we go. First of all, it's important for me to know the context. The context is like global warming at the end of the 21st century is at least up to 2 degrees more warm. And that means it's more frequent drought events all around the world and also in South America, and more frequent fire events. We saw so many events of fire, and that means that our productivity of food is under threat. Also, in the context, we have information about the contribution of livestock to climate change. Mainly, we are responsible of, according to the information, of more than 14% of the global warming, mainly from the enteric fermentation and the feed. And this provides a lot of bad propaganda about meat, like this: meat is climate murder, or the most polluting protein. And this is happening. There are different organizations around the world that highlight this contribution of livestock to climate change. At the same time, our world is increasing in population. For example, in Latin American and the Caribbean population would increase up to 784 million in 2050. And that means more people, more protein from animals to provide. So the provision of protein from animals is going to increase. And also the deforestation due to expansion of agriculture is also on the global agenda. So in this context, resilience, there are so many definitions, but from the IPCC, the resilience is defined as the capacity of an ecosystem to recognize or absorb after a disturbance or hazard climate event by maintaining the ecosystem integrity and structure functional identity. That means to be more resilient, we must reduce the risk of climate change, and also we provide solutions for adaptation capacity of our people, our producers, farmers. So what we believe is that agroforestry landscape provide a great variety of ecosystem goods and services at the farm level. And a resilient model to climate change is a response between an increased diversification and use of agroforestry, different niche and production of food. That means more diverse, more resilient. Maybe it's going to decrease the production or productivity of one component of the farm, like trees or animals. But when we analyze at the farm level or per hectare, the productivity will increase if we are more diverse. As an example, this nice publication, Agroecology and the Design of Climate Change Resilient Farming System. You can see in the picture on the left, was a high productive pasture in the tropics, but they require a lot of water and nitrogen to keep the production. And then when become a very severe drought event from climate change, this is an example in Colombia, the Llanos Orientales, the production decreased dramatically. In comparison, the silvopastoral system, where we have trees, shrubs together, are more resilient, and we provide more fodder availability for animals. So that is one important evidence of climate change resilient silvopastoral system. Also, another paper show us a very interesting study where they analyze the trade-off and synergy and adaptation and mitigation. And they put the silvopastoral system in this framework is a synergy where silvopastoral system with high density of shrub fodders and trees and shade-tolerant pasture increase not only the carbon stock, also improve the pasture and animal productivity under climate change. So we can design our silvopastoral system to be more resilient also. With the global network of silvopastoral system with Julian and so many partners, we provide information. This is one book about silvopastoral system and the contribution to improve resources use and sustainable development goals. And in this book, we provide information about the resource use efficiency. We evaluated a variety of silvopastoral production models, and also we provide information about productivity and socioeconomic and environmental benefits. From these benefits, I like to highlight these ones. First, we have evidence we can increase the production of high quality forage, which reduce the need of supplementation in several cases from external sources. Also, we have information and evidence like there is an increase in cattle production per hectare, higher storage of carbon, both above ground and below ground compartments. Also, there are improvements of the soil properties due to greater uptake from deeper soil layers when we have a silvopastoral system. Also, nutrients coming from the leaf litter decomposition, and also in some silvopastoral system, we can fix nitrogen through fixing nitrogen trees. We improve the soil water holding and infiltration capacity, and that means by reducing the runoff intensity, or we provide, at the same time, we produce meat, milk, and animal fiber habitat for higher biodiversity. Improve the animal welfare, and the topic today is enhance the resilience of soil to degradation and also to nutrient loss and climate change. So, just to share with you some examples in South America, we have with the network, we did a classification of the different type of enrichment. In the previous presentation, they provide details about the data and interaction between all components of the silvopastoral system. We have grazing in native forest in Patagonia and in the Great Chaco, Argentina, Bolivia, Paraguay, and also in Mexico in the low deciduous forest, the Prosopis forest. We have also grazing timber plantations, also in different parts of Argentina with poplars, pine trees, and eucalyptus, in Paraguay, Uruguay, and with acacia in the central, very dry Chile side. Also, there are very good examples of grazing and fruit production. The case of Mexico and Colombia. There are beautiful pictures of animal grazing in this fruit production system. Also, very important is the living fence and wheat barriers, mainly in Central America and Colombia. You can see the pictures there. And also the hedge rows. That is a very good option, mainly with the introduction of Titonia diversifolia, which provides a very good fodder for animals, or sambucus. Or very intensive silvopastoral system with the introduction of leucaena and also with Titonia and shrub. And there are examples with more than 6,000 shrubs per hectare. It's very intensive. And in Mexico also with leucaena and star grass. So there are a very wide range of examples. And I guess my friend later from Australia will talk about more about leucaena. But that means we can intensify and diversify the system at the same time. Also, there are the evidence of more diverse production systems through the silvopastoral design. We provide more sustainability because we provide habitats for more biodiversity. That's the example of Colombia. It's just a comparison between mature forest, secondary forest, and agroforestry, intensive silvopastoral system, and also degraded pasture. And the plant diversity in silvopastoral system, we can hold 81 species in the system. And also analyzing the beetles diversity. Also, there are very, very good response in this, and also the birds. But resilience for me and for the silvopastoral system is not only talking about one farm and one farmer. Resilience also is a social ecosystem because the resilience cannot be maintained by the single component. There are different subsystems. We have the farm, but there are socio-ecological at the landscape level, and there is evidence, it's a present work, where they analyze traditional management when we look after only the natural subsystem, for example, to manage the grazing, exclusion, or the livestock production. But there are other subsystems, the human subsystem, where this interaction with financial and social subsystem with information. And when we take action at the landscape level, that means the management scale is the landscape, considering the all components. We are more efficient to decrease, for example, the fire risk, or decrease the risk of forest loss or degradation of our soils. And also, we can provide a consolidation of the social network, maintaining the livelihood of rural families associated to agroforestry or silvopastoral system. And for me, this social ecological system approach is very important at the landscape level, because provide a resilience approach. And this, we are more able for a country or for a region to reduce the vulnerability of agroforestry systems to anthropogenic or climate drivers. So there is a task to have a good design of silvopastoral system for a particular farm, but also to integrate farms at the regional and landscape level, if we want to be more resilient as a society. So for me, respect the 10 minutes Julian provided me. In conclusion, there are more diverse silvopastoral system means more resilient to climate change than monoculture compared with a single crop. And I think we need to go further in the information, provide more evidence of this resilience of silvopastoral system. We talk with you today in the journal. Other point is to scale up real evidence in the field of silvopastoral system. More real farmers with a different design, with a different climate, soil, and it's important. And management study at the farm level throughout the production cycle, not only one small spot for a short period of time, together with conservation measurements and integrated with the landscape is important. And also for me,
Pablo,
increase, yes?
parece que se quedó congelada. Your screen is frozen, so perhaps you're moving, but your screen is not moving anymore.
Maybe it's a problem. Well, I'm finished at the moment. Now it's working.
No, I still have a frozen, but yes, please continue that.
Yeah, I don't know I will try again. Sorry for that. It's 10 seconds to finish. Sometimes this virtual meeting has this problem. You can see again?
Yeah.
Can you tell me, Julian, which one was the last one?
You were in the 19. You were in the 18, but you can move to the 19 now. Yeah, go ahead.
So now you can see the conclusions?
Yes, all right.
Okay, thank you. Now the second point is, I was talking about we need more real evidence in the field of different silvopastoral systems and management study at the farm level, taking the whole production cycle together with conservation and integrate this real evidence from our farmers at the landscape. And the last point that for me is also important is to strengthen the installation of industry to increase the added value of all products coming from silvopastoral system and also to have a marketing strategy. Before to finish, I would like to invite you very soon. There is our International Congress on Silvopastoral System in Mexico, November this year. And it's the first Congress also the Global Network Silvopastoral System. You are really welcome. It's an action also, not only the Global Network of Silvopastoral System, also at the global agenda. So for us, it's an important event, and you are very nice and invited to this. So that's all what I want to share with you, and thank you very much. I think I stopped to share the screen. It's yours, Julian, also.
Thank you, Pablo. Thank you very much for all this overview of the silvopastoral arrangements in South America. Now we're moving to Europe. We have a presentation by Teresa Pinto Correa. Teresa is the director of the Mediterranean Institute for Agriculture, Environment and Development at the University of Évora in Portugal. And she has coordinated several projects and studies in Portugal and Europe in rural landscapes evaluation and management with emphasis in the montado and the edge. Her presentation will be Silvopasture as a contributor to climate change and adaptation in Europe, the case of the Iberian montado and the edge. So Teresa, the floor is yours, and thank you for your presentation.
Thanks very much, Julian, for the presentation. Thanks for inviting us to be part of this webinar. It's a pleasure to be here. And good afternoon or good morning or good evening to all those who are listening around the world. So this is a presentation about the systems we know best, which are the systems from the Iberia, Montado and the Hesa. And I've prepared it together with my colleagues, which you know well, Isabel Ferraz de Oliveira and Elvira Sá Batista. So we have heard a lot about the silvopastoral systems. These are our landscapes. That's the landscapes of the place where we are, of where our university is. We are in southern Portugal, in Évora, and this is the landscape surrounding us. It's an open silvopastoral system with cork trees or holm oaks and cork oaks, and you have grazing underneath. There has been a rotation with cultivation, but it's rare nowadays, so it's mainly pasture. And the landscape looks like this. You have more open areas, more closed areas, some shrub. It's rather fuzzy, and also by this it's rather interesting. So what is the rate of these systems in Europe? They are rather significant, especially when we think about extensive grazing. They occupy circa 15 million hectares. And that means that for grazing areas, they occupy 35% of the actually grazed land. And you can see that most of it is in Southern Europe. We have a lot in Iberia, there's in France. So what we have, the brown ones or yellowish, they represent areas where you have grazing. So grazing under woodland, under open woodland. And here it's more the density of woodland areas, so it's not considering the animals. But what I wanted mainly to stress here is that you see the concentration in Southern Europe, a lot in Iberia, and that's why also we think by talking about the Iberian systems, we are really talking about the areas where we have the most important concentration of silvopastoral systems. But you have also in Corsica, they are also found in Greece and in other parts in Romania, in Bulgaria, so that they are all over in Southern Europe. And it's also in Southern Europe that we have really the hotspot of the vulnerability to climate change. So if you see the two maps, you can see that where we have the biggest concentration of silvopastoral systems, it's also the regions where we will be sooner under climate change impact and more serious climate change impact. So the objective of this webinar today to talk about or consider the importance of these systems for resilience to climate change is highly timely for Europe. And what is particular in Mediterranean Europe, particular for the Mediterranean climate, but maybe you all know about it, but the question is that we have our warm season is also our dry season. And not only this, as you can see in this graphic, so you can see here the temperature and the rain curve, but here you can see the interannual variation, and you can see how strongly interannual variation in precipitation we have. That means that we need to have systems which can cope with this variation. And also in southern Portugal and southern Spain, we have this high percentage of very, very thin soils. So the soil is very fragile and prone to erosion. So there's really strong limiting conditions for a variety of other crops. And that's why this combination of a system which is complex and has trees and in grazing, it's highly indicated to be able to be resilient. It's an area where we have human occupation since many, many years ago. And that means combined with an extensive system, we have really, in Europe, the biodiversity hotspot is in the Mediterranean, together with a unique, diverse cultural richness. So it's extremely important to talk about these systems which are now exposed to this climate change and socio-demographic pressure due to tourism mainly and urbanization. What are the main benefits of silvopastoral systems in relation to climate change? They have been mentioned already. What we show here, it's a drawing of the different components of the system. I think I would like to highlight the question of the adaptation, because it's really by the diversity of products, we really will be able, even in a scenario of warmer temperatures and less rainfall, to maintain a diversity of products, to increase the diversity of habitats, if we keep it as extensive systems, with the structural and functional diversity which is characteristics of these systems. And also we will be able to reduce the impacts of these extreme weather events and the stress in flora and fauna while keeping these travel corridors for fauna migration. So these are some of the main topics where we can see there is an advantage of these systems. But I would like to talk in particular about what's going on in the montado, which is the system we have in Portugal. It's similar to the one in Spain. We have about 1.1 million hectares in Portugal and about 3.5 million in Spain. And its resilience can also be clearly demonstrated by the long time span we have had this system. First concentrated in smaller areas, in the middle of forestry areas, but since the 13th century, we have this type of system. It has expanded hugely in the 18th century, and since then it has varied in area and in the openness of the system, but it has been more or less the same system along all these centuries. So it shows also its resilience. We have wood pastures with high quality livestock combined with the core production. So there's several layers of trees because the regeneration is normally a natural regeneration. It's a highly complex system with fractional fuzziness, with spatial fuzziness, which increases the biodiversity interest. And it's grazed both by sheep, by the Iberian pig, which is mainly known by the hams, which it can be produced by it, and by cows. And recently, more and more, we have grazing by cows, and I will talk just in a while about it. It's also known by the diversity of products and income sources it supports. And recently, it has been classified as a classification in Europe of what it's called high nature value farming systems, which are farming systems which combine production with high nature values. And they are recognized within the European Union as systems which should be preserved because they have these two outcomes. They produce food and fiber, but they also produce ecosystem services. So it's a classification which exists, and these montados and dehisas are somehow the most, in terms of area, the most important high nature value farming systems existing in Europe. What is the resilience of the montado connected to? It's connected mainly with this management model, which has been perfectionated or improved along centuries, which consider these several components equally. The crop production, which now is a bit reduced, but at least the animal production and the forestry production. And the extensive use allows the adaptation to the interannual variability, which I've talked about, but also the natural regeneration of trees. And this is what makes it possible to have these different layers of trees. And when the older trees die, there will be new ones coming up. And this creates this variability, which also provides different forage opportunities for the animals when grazing is less abundant. So it's really the combination of the components which has made its resilience. And what have we seen in the last decades? At different scales, so analyzing the response indicators at different scales, we see the same. There's an increase in the grazing intensity, and this was mentioned just before by Pablo, and I think it was mentioned also by José Chibou, the question that we really need to adequate grazing to the capacity of the system. And because of increases in the support to livestock production in the Common Agricultural Policy, which is very important in Europe for the farming models which are adapted, we have had an increase in the grazing type, so a shift from sheep and pigs to cattle, from lighter races or breeds, which are the indigenous ones, to heavier breeds, and also an increase in the number of the cattle units or the livestock units. So after this threshold of 0.4 to 0.6, we really see at the different scales, at the farm scale, we analyze at the farm scale, at the patch scale, or for the whole region, a decrease in the density of the montado and the density of the trees. So it's like the key number. Generally, maybe some farms can have better soil and more grazing or more pastures, and they could support a bit more. But this is the key threshold for keeping the balance of the system, which is under, it's being broken now because of this trend to intensify the system. So intensification has been a problem recently. And it has also different impact indicators shows it is not just that there's more cattle, but it opens up the tree cover. And by opening up the tree cover, we increase very much the temperature at the soil level. And this will in turn decrease the capacity of the young trees to regenerate and to grow. So this increase in the temperature, it's of course highly representative of a danger or a risk for the montado future if we consider that the temperatures are generally increasing. So that means that the risk of not being able to cope with climate change will be stronger in the future. So what have we faced recently? We have faced a general decrease in the density of trees. So what because this is a fuzzy system, we call it, sometimes when we talk with landowners or with the policymakers here, is unseen change, because what happens is that change occurs step by step. It's not because the trees are cut or taken out or replaced by something else, is because this pressure of grazing and also the heavy machinery for plowing. When we analyze with remote sensing or with other types of spatial analysis, we can detect the changes, and it leads to these openings in the montado. They lead to a progressive reduction of the area of montado. And we have had this very strong reduction for the whole region of about 5.5 thousand hectares per year until 2006. And from 2006 on, we don't have for the whole region, but we have for samples, and it's even increasing this loss in the montado. So even if it's a resilient system adapted to the conditions, we are very worried of its decrease in area. And what happens is a kind of cumulative effect until this threshold where regeneration of trees, it's not possible because the temperature is higher and because a new plantation will not work. So there's a kind of threshold of no return where the system disappears. What have we been trying and progressing in this presentation a bit to possibilities or perspectives for improving the situation? We believe it's highly important to work with producers, to work with farmers, to co-construct models of new management models with the farmers. So there is an opportunity, a window of opportunity within the Common Agricultural Policy, which is what is called the result-based payments. So agro-environmental payments, which are not paying practices, so grazing in a certain intensity or using a certain type of practice of breeds, but paying by results. So measuring the results, environmental results, and paying for them. And this normally is done in a certain area where all the producers or the producers who want to, but it's worked with a group of producers in a certain area, and they get extension or advisory service to help them. So what we are just showing is an example. We have been working in a Natura 2000 area, which is a conservation classified area in Europe. Both researchers from our University of Évora, technical staff from the administration, and producers to propose a model program for these result-based payments. So the sheets here, they are the indicator sheets which make it possible to evaluate in each farm what are the objectives they have reached, and on the basis of these to calculate what type of payment they would have on a yearly basis, but the objective is decided on a 5 years basis. So this is what we see as one type of solution. Of course, it's limited, it's local, but it's in order to be able to maintain this system and to work with the producers to be able, if we have these payments in Europe for agro-environmental achievements, that they are more conscious of the need to show what achievements they can attain, and by these also being able to support better the mitigation of climate change or adaptation to climate change effects. So this is going into a bit of the proposals for possible solutions. We think this could be a trial which can be done also in other parts of the world, because these environmental payments can be justified by the climate change effect or by the biodiversity effect or by the soil protection effect. So if we have this effect, then you should be paid by it. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. you for showing us that beautiful ecosystem of the montado, and also seeing how the influence of management and the other aspects related to climate change can put that beautiful ecosystem in danger, and so we can deal with it. And also for showing about the payment of environmental systems and this scheme that could be a good way to reduce the one of the main issues related to the economic problems to adopt this system. So thank you very much, and we'll move to the next presentation. We're going to move now to Africa. In this case, we will have presentation by Rubrat Belem, who works as a research coordinator in the EQUIP project, which is called Strengthening Smallholder Livestock Systems in the Future at the Feed and Future Innovation Lab at the University of Florida. Dr. Belem also have a lot of experience in Africa, mainly in Ethiopia, and he will be talking to us about the perspective of these systems in Africa and how they could deal with climate change. So, Dr. Belem, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Mulubran. I work for the Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems at the University of Florida. The work I'm going to present is mostly from my work back in Ethiopia, in northern Ethiopia. What I will be doing is give findings from that work and try to bring lessons for all over Africa as well as other places. I admit that the system that I work at is completely different from some of the systems that we have seen, but that's to be expected. I hope you're seeing my presentation. Can you see it?
Yeah. But there is a can you reduce the size of the participants? Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
You can see it now, right?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. So yes, we may argue or we may differ in the nomenclature, but I would say Silvopasture or trees integrated into pasture lands is a very natural situation in Africa, whether it's in pastoral system or the mixed crop livestock system, or whether trees are planted into farmlands, which by the way are seasonally also grazing lands. I would say silvopasture is a very common thing in Africa, but the system may differ in terms of its dynamics, in terms of components, and the level of integration as well as the level of management by farmers. So most of the research we did starts from the understanding that silvopasture is better than conventional pasture, which by African definition means having only herbaceous plants in the pasture. Usually it's more drought tolerant or climate resilient from our definition. It results in a reduced methane emission because the quality of fodder that's obtained from silvopastoral plants is also better to the animals, which reduces their enteric methane emission and other emission. It improves soil fertility definitely, and most importantly for most African producers, multi-purposeness of the silvopasture is what they appreciate most. So there have been many studies. Some of studies we did in northern Ethiopia and others we reviewed. So the common observation is the soil fertility improves in pasture lands whenever trees are integrated there. So nitrogen, carbon, organic matter, many quality indices are improved. When silvopastures are compared to conventional pastures, there is a significant increase in income because farmers obtain more inputs, more cash from selling products like wood, timber, and other non-timber products from the trees, and also because the productivity of the pasture land improves. And what's unique for African silvopastoral systems is the trees that are integrated into the silvopastoral system, they also serve as a source of fodder. Farmers usually prefer a fodder tree and they feed their animals using that fodder tree. Our own study, for example, in one tree species in Africa indicates, in Ethiopia, indicates that the productivity of goats improved while cost of production is reduced by about 50%. There have been some reviews which were done on the studies on Silvopasture in Africa, and in most cases, there has been an improvement in microclimate, nutrient cycling, water dynamics, soil fertility, and the likes. So generally, Silvopasture is a good system that improves not just the environment, but also the income and also the resilience of producers in Africa. But there are challenges. Some of the common challenges are that tree integration is declining from time to time in many systems, whether it was a natural system that's managed by farmers or deliberately introduced, it's declining. And for the reasons for this are overuse. Many trees have been overharvested for fuel wood, construction, and the likes. But there is also the condition of bush encroachment, especially in the pastoral and drier areas in Africa. Some noxious weeds are dominating other trees from the pasture lands and rangelands, and they're displacing them. This very green ticket forming Prosopis juliflora is, for example, a very serious problem in parts of Ethiopia and other Eastern African countries. It is displacing other trees, making pasture lands less usable. Our own study in Northern Ethiopia indicated that Dicrostachys cinerea, another less usable or very noxious tree, is also displacing many. The other is the recruitment of trees in pasture lands, as you can see in the right lower picture. Many of the trees in pasture lands in Northern Ethiopia are the older ones. That means they're not replacing themselves. The typical J-shaped distribution indicates that younger are smaller in number and cover, while the older ones are dominating. Not just these ones, but there is also what has been described by other presenters, there is very limited knowledge and awareness among farmers and pastoralists about the value of integrating. Well, they know it, but they are not practicing it because of lack of awareness, as well as very low level of survival rate of some trees, low level of adoption of these silvopastoral practices. We think there could be a solution, again, from our own experience from some parts of Ethiopia. If we understand to farmers, or if we listen to farmers' preferences, maybe some farmers will, not just some farmers, farmers can cooperate because they see value in the system. This is the data of seedlings planted on pasture lands in Northern Ethiopia. A decade-long data indicates that some trees like tree lucerne, sesbania, and lucina that have been introduced by the government, the number of planting declined through years, while one specific tree, a ficus tree, Ficus toninge, increased significantly compared to the others. This was a surprising phenomenon that we observed during our research, and we started to ask, why are farmers planting or integrating certain trees and not others? It turned out that Ficus toninge provides multiple benefits compared to many of the trees that have been rejected, to say so. So like the multiple benefits on feed, fuel, fencing, shading, conservation, cash, timber, and others, they encouraged farmers to integrate those trees into their pasture lands because they give them many benefits. Other values they also observe, like, for example, easiness to establish. Ficus toninge takes only less than 5 years to be an adult. No allelopathy to the underground biomass. The value of the foliage, or the value of the fodder from the tree itself, is very important, specifically for Africa, because of the most of the year is dry. Farmers would have to depend on the fodder from the trees for feeding their animals. So they look at the quality of the fodder from the tree itself. Also the biomass productivity. So compared to sesbania, for example, or tree lucerne that produce relatively lower amount of fodder, Ficus toninge produces 500 times more fodder biomass compared to those trees. As a result, farmers appreciate integrating that into their pasture lands. It also contributes to rehabilitation of grazing lands, which most of the time are degraded in many parts of Africa. About 48% of rangelands are degraded, according to some estimations. They also are good to the environment. In Northern Ethiopia, for example, this Ficus toninge silvopasture has resulted in the re-emergence of locally extinct species like the white-billed starling, a local bird species. So generally they had a lot of benefits. The multi-purpose benefits was important for farmers to accept them, to start them. So there could be a solution. We thought we can have a look at the studies. If this is the reason, we can have a look at why farmers prefer certain trees and what trees would they prefer. So we went to ethnobotany as a practice. So what we did was in an extensive study in Afar and Tigray, these are northern parts of Ethiopia, we collected many fodder and trees from the rangelands, and we took specimen and started asking farmers, do you know this tree? Would you want it to be planted in your farmland or pasture land? And we collected information about what quality they would appreciate from those trees. And it turned out that this helped us to understand that knowledge is different from community to community according to gender, ethnicity, and also that farmers appreciate or people appreciate different qualities in different trees. What was also surprising, unlike to the conventional forestry, where a tree is selected based on its biomass or timber quality, farmers would depend on very complex list of criteria. Sometimes they value different criteria at different times or different conditions. So we classify those criteria into animal-based, plant-based, and multi-purpose. The animal-based are whether the tree itself can help the animal productivity. Mostly, like I said, they want them to be fodder trees. So that is it good for fattening? Is it good for the health, milk, palatability, room and fill, many other criteria they list. Within the plant criteria, is it good in terms of gross biomass production? What about drought resistance? Will it survive the drought years? Is it termite resistant? And within the multi-purpose criteria, they list lots of criteria, but these ones are a summary of what we observed. So charcoal, ethnomedicine, farming implements, can I use it for making a farm implement, fencing, and the likes? So timber is just one of the products here. A lot of other products are identified, and I was glad to listen this morning that even in the US, timber is just one of the products farmers look at, and shows that there is communality. So this extensive study we did, we identified 25 species for both Tigray and Afar regions that have a very good potential to be accepted by farmers and pastoralists to be introduced into their pasture lands. Very typical, the very unique ones I would like to mention are Pterocarpus lisens and Balanites aegyptica. These are three species that are unfortunately disappearing, especially in Western Tigray, close to Sudan. Pastoralists and livestock producers, they like them. As a result, they use them a lot. There is a lot of lopping, cutting, and even stealing trees because they are very valuable, but they are very preferred tree species. So that's ethnobotanical study showed us that knowledge and preference will differ based on ethnicity, gender, and also what quality farmers look at the tree will also differ based on those characteristics. And it is important for us because if we want to introduce the silvopastoral system, we would want to know what they prefer and how their preference is dependent. So getting back to the ficus toninge example, what we did was, once we knew farmers prefer it, we did extensive studies also on the biomass and cutting, for example, how long, when they should be cutting it, on the harvesting and feeding. One typical and interesting experience we had was, it's the northern Ethiopia has an extended dry season during the year. So during most of that dry season, the underground pasture or the ground pasture is dry. As a result, farmers would depend on the canopy pasture. But during the rainy season, they have to harvest it so that there will not be more shading and the underground pasture will have more growth. So they would store and also process it. So we studied all this and developed packages that farmers use for propagating that kind of system. So this also required research on animal feeding, propagation, harvesting. We also developed locally affordable management inputs. Like, for example, if they want to protect it from termites, they have these locally available plant species that are termite repellents. They would plant them side by side with the trees, with the cuttings. We developed a local language-based products that were used for dissemination. Mostly we use a participatory approach, farmer to farmer teaching, because culturally in Ethiopia, and I guess also in most of Africa, farmers would believe more farmers than scientists or outsiders. They usually are suspicious about an outsider coming and telling them to do this. So this picture shows one of the pioneer farmers teaching other farmers on how to plant, how to manage and the likes. And those farmers usually in those trainings would be back to their places, buying some cuttings, buying some planting material to plant them on their pasture lands. And also community to community visits were held to teach farmers. And like I said, usually those farmers are convinced because they see it for themselves and they go back and introduce them in their pasture lands and sometimes also farmlands, which like I said, are seasonally pasture lands in Africa. So the result was, the result and recognitions are that, well, obviously we did a lot of publication, technical peer reviewed, and also promotional publication. And by the end of 2017, 20,000 households have already adopted those silvopastoral systems that we developed together with the farmers. And as a result, we've been awarded and recognized, for example, as the best ecological and climate change adaptation by the Ministry of Science and Technology in Ethiopia. And also we won an Africa-wide climate resilient innovation by SOS Sahel. And our study and findings were featured in Scientific American magazine. You can read it in a title that's The Nearly Magical Proportions of Fig Trees. So these were the results from the experience. We think there are more research and development opportunities, mostly developing multi-purpose and species and varieties, studying them to various agroecological, soil type, production systems, and livestock types. One of the study, the ethnobotanical study we did, gave us a lot of ideas and options where we can develop those species into different agroecologies. And another one is we have to be able to integrate these silvopastoral systems into soil and water conservation or soil reclamation or rangeland rehabilitation, because many places, like I said, are degraded. There is a need for developing seed and planting material supply system, because many farmers don't plant them in their pasture lands because they don't have planting material. Perhaps the private sector can get involved. Like for the fikes, we have seen that farmers are ready to buy them. And if someone was to sell them at affordable prices, it would make sense for farmers to buy and develop. Another is developing nurseries, infrastructure for propagation techniques. We were thinking about, for example, tissue culture propagation so that we can cover more places in short time. The other is developing foliage browse-based animal diets. Like I said, silvopastoral systems in our context, at least in the Ethiopian context, means that they have to be also fodder trees. So this means the feed value of the fodder trees should be studied and diets should be developed based on that. Thank you so much. I'll be happy to have questions.
Thank you very much, Mlumbra. Very nice information you provide about the multi-purpose value of these trees and also on the cultural and ethnology part of this system. Thank you very much. We'll move now to the presentation. Again, moving from continent, we're going to move now to Australia. We'll have Dr. Noel Patches. Dr. Noel Patches is currently working as a senior researcher in the Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. And Noel has a lot of his experience in silvopastoral systems, and particularly during the last 5 years, have been working in silvopastoral systems with Leucaena, Leucina, and grass systems in Australia and Southeast Asia. And he will be talking today about silvopastoral systems in Australia, current situation and opportunities. So Noel, the floor is yours.
Oh, thanks, Julian. Can you see the screen?
Yep, it is.
Oh, perfect. Okay, good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be part of this webinar organized by the Global Network on Silvopastoral System. In these 10 minutes, I will talk about the current situation of silvopastoral system in Queensland, Australia, and their opportunities. So I'm going to start my presentation provided a brief description of the climate and precipitation here in Queensland for those who are not familiar with the region. I will also provide a brief description of the Queensland beef and forestry sector. Queensland is located in the northeastern Australia, contains several climates, as you can see. from temperate climate at the south to tropical at north of the state, arid if we move to the west. The state often experiences climate extremes such as flood, drought, cyclone, heat wave, and bushfire. Queensland rainfall is highly variable, and most of the annual precipitation occurs in summer. In the coastal areas, the average precipitation is around 1,000 millimeters and over, but decreases rapidly when we move to the inland. Queensland has the largest area of the Australian forests with 51 million hectares, covering approximately 30% of the state. Queensland's forest resources are characterized by extensive areas of relatively slow-growing native forests, comprising both hardwoods and cypress pine, and also have around 230,000 hectares of highly productive softwood plantation. These forests support a regionally based processing sector, and most of the timber is used to produce building products. The current national cattle stock in Australia is around 25 million heads, approximately 1 million lower than in 2017. This is mainly due to the severe extreme drought and flooding event that occurred in the last 2 years. Approximately 42% of the total national herd is in Queensland. The beef cattle production here in Queensland is the largest agriculture industry and plays an important role in the economy, and particularly in the regional areas. It is also important to mention that the Australian red meat and livestock industry has set a target to be carbon neutral by 2030. The Meat Livestock Australia is leading the carbon neutrality program through investing in research, development, adoption, focus on industry leadership, greenhouse gas emission avoidance, carbon storage, and integrated management system. So, having described the Queensland scenario of climate, timber, and beef production, I would like to start talking about the silvopastoral system in Queensland. As maybe you know, in the 90s and early 2000s, there was a large investment in agroforestry research in Australia. However, the adoption rate of this system is still very, very low. I believe the most successful silvopastoral system in Queensland and probably in Australia is the silvopastoral system that involves Leukina. This system occupies approximately 200,000 hectares in Queensland and is mainly planted in areas between 650 to 800 millimeters of rainfall per year. Also, with the new cultivar redland, which is a silage tolerant, many producers are now planted in the areas with large precipitation. Usually, Leukina is planted in double rows, 1 meter apart, leaving an alley between 4 to 10 to 12 meters apart, as you can see in the picture. Silvopastoral system with native forests, where the trees, pasture, and livestock are holistically managed as a system, is very low. I don't have the statistics, but the area is very low. Conversely, the practice of allowing cattle grazing in native forests is very common. However, I don't think that we can call silvopastoral system as they are not managed and integrated as such. And moving to opportunities, I like to say that we are in the perfect timing for promoting this system because it is not something isolated that the government or industry want to promote. Right now, producer, industry, and consumer are looking for alternative production systems that basically are more sustainable, and that is silvopastoral system. For instance, producers want to increase productivity and profitability, diversify their production, and decrease risk. Producers are more aware of animal welfare and care more about the environment than ever before. And they are interested in reducing the greenhouse emission and increase biodiversity. At the industrial level, There are no doubt that they are interested in increased beef and timber productivity and promoting alternative production systems adapted to climate change. Meat Livestock Australia want to reduce the greenhouse gas emission of the beef industry and become carbon neutral in 2030. They are focusing on different approaches for achieving that, but we consider that silvopastoral system highly can contribute to that. And consumer level are demanding environmental friendly products, want to know what's the footprint of the meat they are consuming, or if the timbers came from sustainable managed forests. And of course, they are quite interested in the animal welfare. All these components can be provided with the silvopastoral system. In my opinion, I can see the silvopastoral system in private native forests has a lot of potential for many reasons. There are around 1.8 million hectares of private native forests in southern and central Queensland, where managing, harvesting, and timber is allowed under the Vegetation Management Act. Most of these private native forests is grazed by cattle, and the understory pasture are considered as a key forest resources. However, forest productivity under unmanaged native forest is low, as you can see on the left photo. Adoption of sustainable forest management improves tree stand productivity by reducing competition with the trees and provides opportunity to enhance pasture productivity, as you can see on the photo on the right side. Here is another example of opportunity for silvopastoral system. It is a common situation here in Queensland, where the regrowth, the woody vegetation in paddock occupy all the area of the paddock that were cleared many years ago. This is considered a big problem for many producers who spend a lot of money trying to control the weed for them. But what happens if we want to have both of them? We have to have the forest and we have the pasture together. And this is an example with a producer who want to do that. He started doing the thinning in 2006, reduced the stem per hectare to around 300 hectares, 300 stem per hectare, sorry. He did another thinning around 2010 to reduce the density to 103, 153 per hectare. And after 10 years, you can see the system where you have a beautiful trees and pasture underneath. This is an example after almost 50 years of age. This outcome won't be the case in all situations. It is important to know what is the species of the woody weed are, and this will determine if it is worthwhile managing them or not. The area where leukemia will continue to grow in Queensland and potentially in Western Australia as well. Currently, sterile leukemia cultivar is being developing and it is showing promising results. What I like to see in the future is the leukemia producer can add another layer to the system. Silvopastoral system with harbor plantation has a lot of potential as well. There are several harbor species suitable. We know very well what is the response of them according with the region and the precipitation. Timber can be as a long-term investment with large profit after 20, 30 years, and beef can provide yearly income. So to finalize this presentation, I like to mention that there are still research gaps that need to be filled. And this system needs to be validated in different regions in Queensland. We need to document what is the livestock and timber production, for example, evaluate different established methods and design of this system, document the effect of animal welfare, have a strong information of the financial and economic outcome of the system, and also we would like to validate what is the environment benefit of the silvopastoral system. So we still have a lot of work to do. And that's the end of my presentation. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Noel, for the presentation of for that overview of the silvopastoral system in Australia. It's very interesting to find all the common things that have with silvopastoral systems in some other regions, but it's also very interesting to see the term carbon neutral in the intentions of the government. Thank you very much. We will now move to a couple of questions. We are running out of time, and I don't want to keep more people. There are different time zones in this, but we have a couple of questions that I would like to I mean, many of them have been already answered directly to who has been doing the questions, but there are one general question that is related to the amount of information that is available on silvopastoral systems. There was one particularly by Carlos Lascano that was talking about the how there are a lot of information on temperate regions on interaction and components on silvopastoral systems, and it seems to be relatively few information in tropical silvopastoral systems. I would like to Dr. Shibu to expand a bit more on the answer he gave this question to Dr. Lascano. So please, Shibu, could you expand a bit more about what the situation is in terms of the situation you could see from your journal and from other information you gather about how is this information evolving, both temperate and tropical systems.
Thank you, Julian. Yeah, I answered that question, looking at information that's available for tropical and temperate silvopastoral systems. I can clearly say that the information out there is increasing. We still do have a lot of anecdotal information without a lot of solid data. We make a lot of claims, but when you dig deep, looking at, okay, where is the data? That's where we struggle. But as I showed you in my talk, if you look at that exponential increase in terms of the scientific literature out there, a lot of those publications are, as I said, coming out in mainstream literature, and a number of those publications are looking at information related to the biophysical interactions among the components in silvopastoral systems. There is a lot of information also out there about barriers to adoption, but very little on economic analysis. And we still need a lot of data, there is no doubt about it, on the return on the investment. And there was a question about that, and I saw that Julian tried to answer that. It depends. It's not easy to answer a question like that, because it depends on the diversity of what we call silvopasture and the stage in which you are in a silvopastoral system. Could be young in a mature stage or anywhere in between, and so there are a number of factors depending on the diversity of the species that you are looking at, trees, forage, the kind of animals you use, and the soil, site, socioeconomic realities, so the market. So if you look at all of that, we need a ton of data on the economic side of silvopasture, but unfortunately we don't have good data, not only in the tropics, but also even in the temperate region. So we still need a lot of data on all aspects of silvopasture. Having 125 publications in the last 5 years in the literature, when you compare that with any of the disciplines, the traditional disciplines represented in silvopasture, you look into forestry, you look into the forage sciences, you look into livestock, you will see tens of thousands of articles in a 5-year time frame. And you look at Silvopasture, we have just 126 in the last 5 years. So there is a dearth of information out there. We need more data. But the efforts are happening. More and more people are looking into the integrated system that we call Silvopasture. So it gives me hope. Based on my experience with agroforestry systems, the premier journal in the field, published by Springer, I see, as editor-in-chief, I see increased submissions related to Silvopasture. I see that every week. And so there is hope. A lot more people are getting into silvopastoral research on all different aspects. So we'll have a lot of information in the future.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shibu. Very comprehensive answer. And I think that's an issue in which we are all precisely trying to work, and this webinar is part of that, trying to exchange information about what's going on in several parts of the world and trying to get more information on them. I'd like to go now to a question given to Matt about the strategy to resolving the lack of integrated skill in the outreach. But I would like to expand a bit more to ask you, how do you see the adoption trend of silvopastoral systems in the US, and what strategy can you use to increase that adoption if that's required?
Yeah, so anecdotal evidence does suggest that silvopasture adoption is increasing across the US. It was just, we don't have any hard numbers on it, but at least at the National Agroforestry Center, we work with a lot of natural resource professionals that advise landowners. And we keep hearing from them, more of the producers that they work with are interested in silvopasture. And a lot of the reason is shade for livestock, animal well-being, and increasing production. So we don't have any hard numbers on it right now, but what we're hoping is that national survey that's coming out next January will serve kind of as a baseline that we can work from. And then after that, we'll actually start being able to really assess what are the trends in silvopasture adoption over time. And one thing I didn't present from that synthesis we did conduct was that 88% of the farmers that started using silvopasture reported that they'll continue to do so in the future in the US. That's kind of a really high retention rate considering other agricultural practices. But again, we need more data, and we're hoping to get some come January. And one other thing I'll say about silvopasture adoption, there have been a lot of studies looking at that in the US and even globally, but if you actually look at who was surveyed for many of these studies, it was just farmers, and they made inferences about silvopasture from a larger sample. And in a lot of cases, the farmers they surveyed weren't even grazing livestock or didn't even have livestock. And so there's a lot of information out there about silvopasture adoption that may show less interest than there's actually there just because of who was actually surveyed. And again, the synthesis paper we're coming out with in a few months really gets into those subtleties about how we need to do a better job in the agroforestry community of who we're surveying, and really breaking certain groups out into clusters to really get at adoption behavior. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to address a question that is not answered yet from Alexander Bren from Brazil, who is asking to Dr. Shibu about the accumulation of carbon in soils. And he says that the dead on replacement of roots is a desirable cycle, but how to find the correct grazing pressure to keep the forage productive, and at the same time the carbon sequestration, so that there is no like direct negative interaction of those two factors. To you, Dr. Shibu.
Sorry, Julian, that was for me?
No, that was for Shibu, Teresa. For you.
So do you want me to answer, Julian?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Sure.
Let me just take a look at the question again. Give me just a second.
Right.
So you're talking about the accumulation of carbon in soils, right?
Yes, yes. And how to find the correct like the balance in between the grazing pressure and the accumulation of carbon in soil.
Well, so the actual question is, how do you find the balance between
Grazing pressure and accumulation of carbon in the soil? How to take advantage of the productivity without decreasing
how do you find the correct grazing pressure to keep the forage productive at the same time that carbon sequestration in the soil becomes an important greenhouse emission or mitigation strategy? Well, I'm not an expert on forage production, but again, I shared the data or at least the philosophy out there when it comes to rotational grazing, so that you are trying to, again, there is nothing called maximizing anything when you are trying to combine multiple components in a system like Silvopasture. I showed one graph, I think you remember, showing soil compaction and root growth. It was a schematic. And if there is no soil compaction, you get the maximum root growth. What does that mean? You get the maximum carbon in the soil. But if you introduce animals, there will be some pressure. But if that pressure is too much and the compaction is too high, then of course, your carbon that is sequestered in the soil becomes too less. So you're looking for that optimum grazing pressure so that the regrowth on the above ground is, it may not be ideal, but it is still, it may not be maximum, but it is still optimum. And the root growth below, you're not trying to maximize it, but it is still optimum. So it is a balancing act, because you need that root growth and the carbon not only for mitigating climate change, but also for the regrowth of your forage so that the system is sustainable. So how do you find that balance? Well, it depends on the forage species that you are working with. Is it warm season? Is it cool season? For example, if it is warm season, they aim for 12 to 18 inches regrowth, and then you take down perhaps that to about half. And if it is cool season, you aim for about 8-inch growth, and then you take it down to 4-inch. And so that your root growth is optimum, shoot growth is optimum, your cattle are happy, so you are getting the benefit of the forage, but then you're also getting an optimum allocation below ground. So it depends on your species. So you have to manage the density or the stocking rate of your cattle. You have to also look at the resting period. Depending on the animals, the time they are on the pasture, you also need to make sure that you provide enough resting period so they regrow above ground, regrow below ground before you reintroduce the cattle. If you don't keep that balance, of course, you are going to ruin your forage, and then ultimately there is no carbon going into the ground, no carbon sequestered above ground, and the sustainability of the forage is in danger. So it is a balancing act. And there is information out there, I believe, well, it is available in the US, I know that. Depending on what kind of a forage system you are dealing with, there are guidelines available on how long you can put the cattle. And this again goes back to the rotational grazing principles. So look into locally and see what's available for rotational grazing. And I'm sure you will find information based on your particular situation.
Thank you very much, Shiv. Well, the list of questions continue growing, but I think that we are running a lot of out of the schedule right now. So I will say that we're going to finish by having a well, I will first ask all the participants, panelists, to take a look at the question and try to answer on the chat, the question and answer chat. And then I would like to give the floor to Paolo Peri for some closing remarks, and we'll finish the webinar right now. I would like to continue all this interesting discussion, but I think that we have already more than half an hour more time that it should. So please, Paolo, the floor is yours for the closing remarks, and thank you all for the participation.
So, Julian, really was a very good meeting. We appreciate Julian from the Global Silvopastoral Network, the participation of the presenters and also all the people who participated. So we had 6 presentations, very contrasting. And just to highlight 3 points to close this meeting is like silvopastoral systems really after our presentation became a productive and sustainable alternative in different parts of the world, growing in different climates and social conditions, situations. We have example of USA, Africa, Australia, South America, and the beautiful Mediterranean Europe. When I say sustainable, there are different aspects, carbon fixation, soil conservation, habitat for biodiversity. Also, there are evidence. We need more, I think, evidence related to silvopasture being more resilient to climate change compared with monocultures. And this is based on more complex and diverse systems where we produce meat, milk, and sugar. So there is a multi-use of the system. But then was highlighted that silvopastoral system needs a more suitable design at the farm level, but a very intelligent integration of trees, pasture, and livestock. And this is to optimize productivity and profitability. That means the farmer needs to increase or improve the income also. And also I'd like to highlight the need to more upscaling the silvopastoral and added value, and also to be involved the scientists, like we collaborate with information, we need to be more close to the public policy makers to assist the farmers, just to link the knowledge with farmers together with the policy makers. So, and there are plenty of good examples and information all the speakers provided. I think we are very, very happy with this participation, and also there are a long way to walk. There are many things to do to put this silvopastoral on the real situation and for our producer. So Julian, for me, again, thanks to all the people, and I'm sure we are going to see each other again.
Okay, thank you very much, Paulo. So I will just to close by thanking all of the participants and panelists, to Shibu, Matt, Paulo, Teresa, Bloombrand, Noel. Thank you for those wonderful presentations. I think that the objective of the webinar was to show the range of silvopastoral arrangements and situations and socioeconomic and cultural drivers of those silvopastoral systems in different parts of the world are well achieved. And I really appreciate all the effort you put in the presentations and all the good questions from the participants. I'm sorry that we weren't able to answer all of them, but I hope that you can find the information in some of the materials that have been sent to the chat. So thank you very much to all of you, and you can find the recording of this webinar in the webpage of the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next webinar. It will be in the following month. Back to you, Eduardo.
Thank you.